Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Black Men Matter series on the male perspective. The podcast that's all about dispelling stereotypes and shining a light on the rich and varied experiences of Black men from all around the world. Each episode aims to broaden understanding and foster appreciation for their unique stories that often go unheard. Now, here is your host, Lana Reid, to introduce you to yet another remarkable Black man with an insightful perspective to share.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today, on this day, I have the pleasure of sitting down with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Dwayne Thomas. He is the founder of Academic, Coaching, Enrichment, and Sports Network, and he is doing some wonderful things, empowering our young people, combining athletics and academics, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with him today, learning more about his work. But first and foremost, as I always do, I take a quick moment to pause and say thank you to you, sir, for making time for me today. Time is a gift. Once we give it, we can't get it back. So I truly appreciate you setting aside this time in your day to talk to me. And did I get it right? Did I get it right?
You got it absolutely right, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Now, before I get started, as we were talking before, my dad was in the military, so I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your service. You served some time in the United States Marines, so thank you for your dedication. But
It was my pleasure.
before your service and before people were calling you the sports doctor or X, you were a young person and somebody introduced you to sports. So tell us about your journey in the beginning.
Yeah, so son first and I'm here today representing Alberta Thomas Davis and Charles Preston Davis Jr., my parental units. And those folks, the person who really introduced me to sports was one of my first pastors, and his name was Ed Miller. And Pastor Miller was the person who kind of gave me that direction through high school. I served as an acolyte in the church and then an assistant for him and one of the young people as a church leader, and academics was always important for my mother. She was mentored by Andre Ward, the pianist, but she rebelled and had a baby, had my older sister when she was in high school. So she lost opportunities to go to college, even though she finished as one of the top students in her high school. But she chose to have my sister, and then a couple of years later have me, and then a couple of years later after that have my other sister, and so on and so on. But in that whole process, she was a staunch disciplinarian. She was absolutely about education and getting out of the poor and under-resourced areas of Philadelphia where we were living and had to live. And she was always one that, talking about, and I briefly mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation about getting to the other side of through, and that meant that we had to face the struggles, deal with what we had to deal with. One of the things that she was a single parent until my pop came into my life when I was 14, and she never went on social systems and social services and all of those things. She worked 2 or 3 jobs throughout that process. And even having the kids that she'd had, and she was disciplined enough to really teach us that there's more to what we were experiencing. And so she opened up a world in terms of taking us to the church. I mean, we're old enough to know that the church used to be the center of our communities. I don't believe that the research would say that it still is. I think that we would say that there's so much dysfunction in our communities now that we don't know where the center is.
True.
And so one of the things that we have going on is, public education is free. And so the fact that we have that means that, that we can change our circumstances. But it is not a perfect system. It's actually an imperfect system. And
Hmm.
so I stand here today to talk about how we can adjust that system and, and use it for what it's good for, make adjustments to that system for what isn't working, and then how we go forward and impact our communities. Excuse me. And so education has always been the key. I've always had opportunities because in United States, especially when you're in the educational system, and if you're 6'4" and a couple 100 pounds, then folks are going to say you're an athlete, whether you want to be or not. And
You must
so
play basketball, right?
everybody said, "Oh, you look like a basketball player," and I'd say, "You look like an idiot." I'm an academic. I'm a great student. And I don't like basketball. I love football. And so, I love to catch passes, throw passes, and I love to hit people. And
Mm.
I would play football even today if I could,
Oh.
versus being, even though 6'4", I played basketball and I was actually okay. But,
Hmm.
but but no, it was always about academics for me because it was always about challenging myself to learn, and I just loved learning. I
Hmm.
love being in school. Everybody will always talk about, oh, I hate school. Da, da, da. I love being in school. And I didn't like summers. I didn't like the breaks. And until we started talking about year-round school or just, being old enough to have my mother allow me to go to the library and,
Okay.
go to the public library on my own. So that's how and then it just was the education and athletics were ways to get out of the poor circumstances in our communities. So
Hmm.
once I started showing some promise in all of these things, people were taking me places that I didn't know I would just be like, okay, yeah, as long as mom said yes, I'm going
Okay.
because it was getting me out of Philly into, I was getting into the Poconos and traveling to different states, representing our community or representing our church or whatever it was, or representing the school. And so that was one of the things. And like I said, educational system is so tied to sports in the United States up to professional sports
Hmm.
that that you can't really be in education and really not, if you're an athlete, you
Hmm.
can't be in education and, you have to be involved in the educational system because even when you go to college, you can only go to college if you get a scholarship or something. And
Hmm.
so that was always the connection. And then I just decided that I need to leverage it the best that I could for me
Mm.
instead of allowing them to use me for whatever it was. Then it was, how do I make this work for me?
Yes. How can I get all
So,
of it out of there?
I mean, that was a long answer, but I
No,
apologize.
no, no. So, were you the only sports person in the family? You mentioned sisters and
No, no,
brothers. Like,
actually, all of my brothers, my older sister, yeah, she kind of got us going, but as we were in high school, they actually shut down our rec center in our
so many
neighborhood
communities, so
for a
many.
lack of resources for whatever reason.
Mm.
And so, and interestingly, when I became the director of Parks and Rec for the city of Baltimore, folks from Philadelphia came because of the ways my systems were set up. Folks from Philadelphia came to consult with me, not knowing that I was from Philly.
Awesome.
And they actually brought Ed Miller with them and his son had moved and he had moved to Baltimore. And so I pulled them when these Philly folks were coming. I actually pulled them into the meeting and actually invited those folks to come into the meeting because they didn't know that my mentor, my pastor, all of that was working in the city
Oh.
no longer as a pastor. He was working in youth, kind of a youth build program.
Mm.
And those folks from Philly didn't know that when I was
Oh,
sitting at the head of the table as the director. And,
awesome.
so another time. I mean, it's a small world, and
Full
it get
circle. Life comes full
yeah,
circle.
it comes back around, especially, when you're doing what I believe are the right things.
Yeah. You mentioned so many things that have provided shoring up, prop up systems in black communities, rec
Yes,
centers. Black churches used to have Saturday school, which provided
that's right.
extra educational opportunities. I remember being small and having my education reinforced by having to stand up and read those Easter recitals and getting public speaking confidence.
That's right.
So, so
That's
there's
right.
so many interworking components in Black communities that we've had to shore up the academics of our young people that I think that we have lost over the years. So it's kind of a sad impact to say.
Well, and that's another reason why sports genius,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things that hasn't been taken from us is that sports, is that art side, that sports side, the entertainment side, all of those pieces. And so what I said is, how do I leverage that to actually accomplish these other goals?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I t teach people the more traditional subjects? How do I, in terms of math and history and social science and all of those things? And so what I said is, okay, we have this hook, which is, sports, but we also have, more importantly, we have the challenges that the colonized system, you know, applies pressure to us in terms of choosing what is intellect and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Sports Genius, I said we have three things, three pieces that we look at. We look at the bard, the lyricist, and the ball player. And in this case, I'll pull from contemporary folks in that if you think about Denzel Washington as a character for Shakespeare, playing
Okay.
Shakespeare, playing Othello, for example. And then you have Kendrick Lamar, who is the lyricist. And then
Mm.
you have someone like LeBron James, who is the ball player.
Okay.
All three of those people are using the same brain,
Mm-hmm.
but only one of them is told that they're intellectual. And that will be Denzel's character in terms of
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
typically because that's associated with white folks.
Yes.
And
True.
white folks don't know that historically there may be an argument that Shakespeare was black. And so, so you have to understand that if you step outside of the kind of colonized learning that we have in the United States, and then understand that globally, that, who knows, maybe that was stolen from us too.
As well.
And so with that, if we think about it from that perspective and think, so I'm old enough to have been around when they first started with the eight intelligences and Gardner's work. And so as soon as that work came out, one of the things that was pressing on me was they're not really recognizing those folks who are people like me,
Mm.
who can be an artist on a football field.
Mm.
I thought about, somebody like Lynn Swan, who was a receiver, and we think about, so he was somebody that I emulated when I was growing up. And
Mm.
so I took ballet to help me with football.
Ah.
And then because of the flexibility pieces, because of the
Okay.
way that I saw him moving, and then, so I gravitated towards that, thinking that, there's art on the football field.
Yes.
But then I'd go back and I'd hear coaches, not for me, but for other athletes talking about, well, these guys are great athletes and all of these things, but they're not doing it in the classroom. And I would think to myself, well, how is it that they can manage all of these complex situations, complex phrases, terminology, and all of these things, and plays, and all of those things, and then not be able to translate that or
Mm-hmm.
transfer that to the classroom? I
Mm-hmm.
said, so there's a disconnect there
Mm-hmm.
that has to be closed. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's taken me a while, but I've come with a system that I believe closes that. And
Okay.
it was actually, so even just last summer, I had a white coach say to me, my athletes are struggling. And I said, well, how can they be struggling when they understand your playbook? They can do all of these things.
Yes,
So
yes.
something's missing. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was able to do some work in our public schools, local public schools, and talking with the kids over the summer. I learned more from them than I think than they learned from me. And what I learned was that the students that I was working with in college, and I was ruining the fact that they came to me unprepared. And so what I said is, so when I worked with the high school students, what I really realized is that they were unprepared. And more importantly, that the system wasn't preparing them, the system wasn't giving them the confidence that they needed to be successful in life, not just as a student, but to be
Mm-hmm.
successful in life. They need to be able to understand how they can use the things that they already know to be successful
Mm-hmm.
instead of thinking that they don't know anything or that none of what they know is actually applicable to anything that's going to help them to have a successful life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really had to look at the learning systems and say, how do I change this so that these folks know that they can move forward into this space? Doesn't mean they're not going to have challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but that they can still be successful and that they can get to the other side of through. And
Mm-hmm.
so my students in terms of college know that before I teach them any subject, I teach them how to learn. And I teach them things like Bloom's taxonomy and
Mm.
those steps that you have to know to have a system to be able to make changes. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a system for that, then you just randomly do
It's
things.
just fun.
And
Yeah.
so I said it's that. And then there's also Webb's depth of knowledge and understanding that these systems will then help you to be able to progress through these different challenges that you might face. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of them might be that, hey, you know what? I've got to remember that there's all of these things that are going on and how I can move through these things.
How do
I've
you?
got to be able to understand the context of which I'm living and how these things are impacting me, and then moving through each of those. And then, so most recently, the literature for Bloom's taxonomy, they took out what's called synthesis. And that basically is how you understand your place in the world and place in all of the things that are going on. And so I put it back. And I
Okay.
say that to my students, you can't move from analysis right to evaluation without really understanding context. And
Mm-hmm.
that context comes through being able to synthesize the world around you and how these things are impacting that. Because then from analysis, you can synthesize it, then you can evaluate its place and how it fits and all of those things, and then get to that place to where you can create something new.
Mm.
And that's that piece. And then it's cyclical. Then once you've moved through that mountain, you understand this, and now you can create something. Now you can start over. Now, with, okay, now I got to remember what I did as I've come through all of that, because that's how we progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. It's understanding, okay, if I'm in the storm, if I go left or I go right, or do I go forward or backwards, I've got to remember the next time I'm in a storm. So now it doesn't take me so long to
That
have to
yes.
deal with the challenge,
That's right.
right? And so, to see those students, those high school students light up, because basically what I did is I left Bloom's taxonomy up on the board. And I said, before you answer any question that I ask you from now on, I want you to make sure you know where you are in that process, right? And then I also put a system up for change, how we go about making change. Well, one of the first things that we can do in making change comes from Elton Mayo's change in terms of, in terms of management systems and things. Except, so as soon as I can introduce some new knowledge, then I can change my attitude about that. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can change my behavior. And once I then can change my behavior, then I can also impact the groups that I'm involved in.
Awesome.
Right. And because in that whole process, it's difficult to, so the initial difficulty is that new knowledge, whatever that takes for you
Learning
to learn
something
that.
new. Yeah.
Then it's a little more difficult to adjust my attitude. Then it's a little more difficult to adjust my behavior. Then it's a little more difficult to change the groups that I'm in. And all of that is also taking time. So at the lower axis is time. On
Mm-hmm.
the left-hand side is difficulty. So as I go up and progress through my life, the sooner I can bring in some new knowledge, the sooner I can change my attitude about something, the sooner I can change my behavior, because it's all about actions. And
Mm-hmm.
all of this education stuff is about actions and how we make informed decisions to change and impact our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to have those systems first, and then I can move them on to, okay, well, let's bring in your sports stuff, and let's say how does your understanding of sports help you to address this problem? Okay, well, you know about LeBron James, for example, you know about his statistics and everything. Okay, well, now let's think about that in terms of math. Let's think about that.
Mm.
So you've been struggling with math, but you don't have any problem understanding, these
All of
statistical
those
pieces and
numbers,
all of
yes.
these things. So it's not really math. It's not
Mm-hmm.
the math that you're struggling with. It's the system that's
Yeah.
telling you that you're okay, in understanding over here in terms of this athletic piece, but you're not okay when it comes to the math. Well, I'm telling you that you already know
Know
this.
it. We just have to flip that switch, right?
Yes, you have to flip it and understand that nobody else, you have this in you. And because you have it in you, you just didn't know the language, the nomenclature, whatever it was. You didn't know that. Well, now you do.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you know that, you can make it work for you instead of working against you or having somebody else say that you don't have something when you actually do have it,
It's there.
and you just didn't have it in the way that they were trying to force it on you. But now because it's your interest, it's something that you have some passion about, some emotion about, you're going to be interested in it. You're going to be able to want to do a little bit better and do more. And so
Mm-hmm.
let me match your interests with these desires to be able to be a professional, to be able to go on to your life and be able to be successful, to be able to
Awesome.
survive these different challenges that you're, inevitably going to face. That's where sports genius comes in. The hook is sports. The fact of the matter is that there are more people that know about sports than education than any of those other things. And because we've made sports that big of a deal, it makes sense for me to say, hey, the thing that I love, if I can use that as a tool for other people and their success, that's sports genius.
Mm.
And they have that because they have that interest in all of those things already in them. Now we can bring out those things that society might be saying that they never, because I use sports genius and say to people who've been involved in the justice system, you can cross over, which is a move from basketball. You can cross over from basketball and then come back into society and be successful. And you can do that because you already have a knowledge and love about sports. So now let me teach you about, a potential career in something that doesn't matter whether you have a felony or not. I can get you, back on your
Mm.
feet. And so that now
Awesome.
you're not dependent on the system, because that's the price of our justice system, is to try to hold you down and put you back in the cycle. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you to go from the court to the Supreme Court. It's
There
from the
you go.
basketball court to the Supreme Court,
There you go.
not from the court to the jails or the school to prison pipeline. Well,
There you
here's
go.
how we break that. And
That's
we,
awesome.
we can't break it just through talk. We
Mm-hmm.
have to break it through systems that actually use similar resources and say, here's how we move forward doing
Awesome.
these things.
Awesome. Awesome. Listening to you talk, it brings back a conversation that I had with a young man. He was still in high school playing sports,
Hmm.
and he had some support systems around him, so he had an understanding of what he was fighting against.
Sure.
But he was saying, he was basically alluding to the fact that with the colonization and everything, the systems always shapeshift to
Yes.
create new systems of oppression.
Moving the goalposts.
Yes. So
Yes.
he was like, I feel like, he calls me auntie. He's like, the time that I have to invest in high school, to be good at this sport, the
Hmm.
tapes and all the stuff. They don't give me enough time to actually pursue the academics. And he says, I feel like that's intentional.
It
Um,
is.
it is.
Yes, so I have my book that's going to be coming out pretty soon. It's called Shut Up and Play Ball.
Mm,
And so they'll tell the athlete, just shut up, practice, just keep training, play the games. Don't try to step into the political process. Don't think that this impacts your life in any kind of way. Just play. Just shut up and play. And so all the way from school, we don't have the same type of restrictions and legislation in terms of protecting young people's time in
mm,
in our school system as we do when they get to college. In college, we technically have that you can only have them train and be working on their sport 20 hours a week. Well, that's not the case in our school systems. And what the pressures are is to play sports, the singular sport, to focus singularly or to specialize is what it is. To specialize in your sport and have that be an all year round thing. Now, I'm of the old school to say that we don't want kids specializing.
mm-hmm,
Um, but if we don't, then we have in our systems, we fragment the resources. We have, we tell our kid, okay, you're a football player, for example. Well, you can't play basketball because basketball comes right after football. And the way that we set up our system is if you play football and then you go right into basketball, well, you haven't had time to recover. And so if we say for developmentally for young kids, we know that if we've stressed their system over
mm-hmm,
months through one sport, then they need some time to recover.
mm-hmm,
But we force them to go right into another sport. So we've put a big label on the fact that we want kids to be a 3 or 4 sport athlete. Because once we realize they've got a little bit of talent, then we say, hey, you know, we want you on our teams
mm-hmm,
because our teams represent our community. And the way that we have things set up in terms of funding things is that the more that we get exposure and awareness of athletics, then that can trickle down
mm-hmm,
to education and you can use that exposure to get different resources. Now we have these challenges of all of these, huge facilities that we're building, and we're placing those facilities and that development over the development of our young people.
mm-hmm,
And so we have things twisted up. And so in some of the articles that I've written most recently and some of the things that are coming out, it really is to talk about the devastation of the economic and financial systems that we've set up in our communities. For example, we have millions of dollars that come from public taxpayer funds to go to pay for professional sport facilities that are in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And so typically what those professionals have done is that they've basically built this system to say you are not really a professional in big time city if you don't have big time athletics.
mm-hmm,
Well, that big time athletic costs. And so, for example, like I said, I'm from Pennsylvania. And so one of the governors there over the last 10 years or so built we've got Pittsburgh on one end of the state and Philadelphia on the other end of the state. And so, both of them needing big new facilities. Well, they spent billions of dollars, but then you have an educational system that we have a
yeah,
president now who's destroyed our U.S. Department of Education and attacked education. And so now we have these professionals telling, your city can't be a big time city. And if you don't like it, then we will move our team. And then you'll have this albatross of a facility sitting without any way to fund it.
hmm,
And so I have my Brazilian friend sitting here with me. And so the fact of the matter is, you could look at it and say, for example, with the Olympics, we're going to have the Olympics in 28 coming to LA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fortunately for us and for LA is the fact that they already have
The
most of the
facilities.
facilities and
Yes.
everything, so they're not going to be making those expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
But most other places, and for example, Rio has been and Brazil has been devastated economically because of the Olympics and the
Mm-hmm.
World Cup in 2014. Both of them really not having the support system to sustain those facilities after these major events. They're fine while the event's going on. But if you don't have major teams with major sponsorship dollars and major monies pouring into those things, then you don't have the sustainability. And
Oh.
so sports has devastated lots of communities, and that's because we've allowed the message to be that sport is more important than some of these other programs and services, and
Mm-hmm.
primarily because of the taxpayer system. And we've got to change that. I'm coming out with some materials to talk about how we could potentially change that, given the economics of our country. But the reality is that, if you look at Detroit, Baltimore, some of the other major urban areas, their schools are failing, but they have some of the top best facilities in the world. And a lot of those facilities were funded with taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, I'm a Saints fan, and all this time I thought most of the money came from Mercedes. It's the stadium is
No,
Mercedes, but
Tom Benson, who owned all so I know from whence you come because actually one of my very good friends who I'm going to recommend to you, his name is Dr. William Halston. He is from the New Orleans area. He's now
mm-hmm.
currently at Prairie View A&M University. That's my brother from another mother.
Mm-hmm.
And but he's, at one point I thought, I wouldn't mind living in the New Orleans area. That was before
Katrina.
Katrina,
Okay.
because the other thing is, when those resources are taken out of our cities, it's the poorer communities that gets
Yes.
devastated by
Yes.
those withdrawals of
Mm-hmm.
resources. And so, Katrina basically showed the world
Mm-hmm.
how poorly Louisiana and New Orleans was managing, the city resources and services,
Mm-hmm.
um, and which was very similar to what happened with COVID. And most of our inner cities were really the ones that really suffered the most.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the fact that our educational systems were really exposed for
Mm-hmm.
what they are as a management tool more than an education tool.
Educational tool. So, what does a parent or a collection of parent or caregivers do when they realize like, hey, my son or my daughter is exceptional in this particular sport,
Sure,
but I want you to teach my child as well.
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm gonna let you have my child because I know it's, you can say, hey, so and so went to this school,
Mhm.
but I demand you teach my child as well. Is there something parents or caretakers can do to?
Well, one, they have to learn the financial system of the schools in their communities. And so, well, I'll put a caveat on there. If they're not able to take them into, and they don't have quality schools in the public school system, then, and they're not able to afford the private school life or the Catholic school life or what Christian school life, whatever that the case might be, and if they're relying on the public school system, then they need to understand the system, and they need to understand how, that how things are how education is funded in their community and how their taxpayer dollars are being spent or portioned off from
Mm-hmm.
education to these facilities, for example, or to any other major capital projects that they're having in their community. And so the main thing that I'm working on now and seeking sponsorship and investors in is an app that allows a student to no longer be dependent on any educational system. They would be able to use, and so as a former curriculum specialist, I bring to the app development the fact that, what the and in Florida, I helped to create what's called the Sunshine State Standards and coordinated the physical education component of what's called the electronic curriculum planning tool. So every teacher has a resource to be able to go and find lesson plans and unit plans and all of those things using that tool that we created.
DeSantis still lets us use it?
I haven't been in Florida for a while, and so Ron DeSantis was not there he was not the governor that I was writing legislation for. So I take no ownership of that man and all of those things. But yes, the electronic curriculum planning tool is still available,
Okay.
for folks there.
Okay.
Um, but it's those standards. And so now we have what's called Common Core standards that are national
Yes.
standards. And so I combine the Common Core standards with their sports interests, with their reading and math skills levels, their own demographics in terms of their status in terms of as a learner, and they plug all of that into an app that then says, for my grade level, that I've got to know math and social studies and history and each of these pieces are. Then at each grade level, they're able to come in, put all their information in, and then the app will create lessons, unique lessons for them based on their sports interests. So they actually put in, okay, you're Saints fan, so they'll put in the Saints and they'll put in the what's the basketball team in the Pelicans.
Pelicans,
And
Pelicans,
so
yes.
so they'll put in that. And so every lesson, math, all of them, the five subjects, will then pull from contemporary statistics and contemporary data to create lessons for their age level.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's the piece that really is the foundational piece, the ed tech piece for Sports Genius. And then each of these other pieces are the pieces in terms of the Wisdom Keepers, which is the intergenerational program.
Okay.
Crossover is the for justice involved and the reduction of recidivism piece. That's the crossover program. Then there's Sports Pro Pathway. There are folks who don't necessarily want to go to college but want a career in sports. Well, they can find out about Sports Pro Pathway,
Mm,
and they can basically, that program is okay. You know what? If they're whichever state you're in, but we'll stay focused on New Orleans and Louisiana. And
mm,
so if there are major sporting events going on at the Superdome, then we can use those lessons. We can teach you about sports marketing. We can teach you about the operations. We can teach you all of those things and based on these different major sporting events.
okay.
And several. So, for example, I've been a professor of sport management for the last, I don't know, 20 to 30 years or so. But my students haven't had to go to various sporting events
Mm,
to be able to learn about them. I mean, because of television, social media, and all those things, we don't have to go there. But I
yes.
think that there's lots to be learned. If I
Having
can
an experience.
I can take a young person to TD Garden and they can see all of the sponsorship pieces all over the arena.
Yes.
And then what
Yes.
lessons can they can learn quite a few lessons from those pieces.
Yes.
They can learn from what's there and they can also learn from what's not there, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then we can, look at sports finance. We can look at how the arenas in various areas have been financed. From the inception of the arena to how it gets continually financed in terms of revenue. Things and all.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things can be mixed into lessons for kids, depending on what's going on. Okay,
Mm.
some lessons in history. Okay, well, let's go back to Jackie Robinson. What was going on in 1947 when he was, the only black person
Only.
chosen, not
Why
the
was he
only one
chosen?
playing
Yes, but
baseball, but
why
the
was he
only one
chosen?
chosen.
Yes,
And why
yes.
was he chosen over some of these other people who
Mm-hmm.
may even have been better players?
Yes.
But we have to know that history to be
Mm-hmm.
able to tie it in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the roots of Sports Genius. There's nothing going on in the world that where you can't connect. And so the other piece is, and I don't want to leave that one out. is the whole sports and spirituality piece
Mhm.
and that whole combination. And so, for me, that starts with what I call the Damascus Road playbook. And so in the Damascus Road, the transition from Saul to Paul. And most folks know Paul wrote most of the New Testament. Well, but before he was Paul, he was
He was
Saul.
killing
And
Christians, yes.
God needed to work on him.
Mhm.
And God sent him a coach. And that coach was Ananias. And
Right.
Ananias really didn't want to be his coach, didn't think that he deserved to be a coach. But he was because God saw in him something that other folks didn't.
True.
And so he put those two together. And
Right.
so there's pieces and so I've always had so if I can say I've had education, I've had sports and spirituality have always been basically the triangle for me. And so
Mhm.
I said that's a triangle for a lot of people. And so
Mhm.
how do we, bring all of that together and have it be something that that people can get paid for and I'm like, I've been getting paid a long time through sports and education, and I'm loving it, and I love talking to folks about it. Right now I'm not in the classroom, I'm not teaching folks, and so this is another reason why this is great for me,
Oh,
because it gives me another chance to touch folks, in a
yes.
way that is important to me. um, and so that's kind of the whole mix of
Okay.
bringing it all together. So Sports Genius is kind of the umbrella, and each of these other pieces that I'm working on patents for and everything, is to really begin to attack all of these problems and things that we have going on in our community that folks are resources, and we can be resources for each other. Um,
Awesome.
but we have to recognize what the challenges are, and we have to recognize the talent and the brilliance and the genius that's in all of our folks.
Mhm.
And so another piece that I'll share with you is we have what's called the genius mentors. And
Mm.
so instead of, because in our communities, we have all of this brilliance that we don't recognize as
Don't
brilliance.
tap into,
And so
yeah.
we have to begin to label it for ourselves.
Yes.
This is how we control the narrative. So instead of waiting for other folks to tell us what's going on and how it should be, we start to call it what we want to call it. And
Mhm.
so we've had, geniuses on our HBCU campuses for a long time, and they've been under-resourced. So I believe that we can drive traffic through our HBCUs and the intelligence and brilliance that are on each of those campuses, and those campuses can then be resources in communities. And so one of the things that I'm looking to do is one of these days, possibly be the president of a college or university, either my own or somebody else's. Actually, I would prefer that it's my own. And so there's a number of schools that are closing, colleges and universities that are closing right now. And so if there are people out there that hear this message, that have some resources, we have a place, for example, the only primarily Black institution in Indianapolis, which was Martin University, and it
Mhm.
closed just this past year. And so I actually worked at Eastern Nazarene College, which closed in December of 2024. And so we have institutions that are really, facing, trials and tribulations. And hopefully there's a group out there that can come together that I believe that I've created a model of how we can anchor several different programs on those campuses, redesign the structure of college campuses, and make them more of an intergenerational place instead of just a traditional, 18 to 20, 21 or
Mhm.
whatever it
Mhm.
is. That model doesn't work, very much anymore. And that's what COVID showed us, is that we didn't need that as much.
Mhm.
We could learn in our own spaces.
Mhm.
We pushed it out. We pushed education out. Again, that's where that management piece comes from,
Mhm.
is we pushed it out because we made it that we couldn't have quote unquote stay-at-home moms or dads anymore because both mom and dad needed to be working two or three jobs to be able to sustain the quality of life that they wanted to live.
Just to keep
And
the lights on.
and
Yes.
so that's so but we have to be responsive to that. And so I'm looking as well to if it's me as a vice president or a president at a institution, then it becomes how do we leverage the resources on those institution on those campuses into our communities, which we haven't done very well in doing. We
Mm-hmm.
have lots of these different institutions, but everybody operates in these silos because of what we call capitalism, and so, that really is a much more destructive term than people really think and
Mm-hmm.
really understand. And it was intentional. And
Yes.
so we have to work against those things. And so that's where Sports Genius comes.
Awesome, awesome. And you mentioned revitalizing a couple of HBCUs and
Yes.
the struggles that HBCUs are having today. And
Hmm.
we've been talking about systems and stuff like that.
Yes.
I think one of the things that has kind of debilitated higher education for Black environments like the HBCUs is the dependency on the systems that have oppressed us. So a lot of the
Right. It's a
money and
colonized system. It
yeah,
was
a lot of the
created
money,
as a
yeah,
reaction to the colonization. And so, but what we haven't done is begun to create our own narrative around it.
self-sufficiency.
We still kept that dependency on those folks who forced us to create a system.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still plenty of places around this country to where the folks who have the resources would rather pay to keep a separate system, a separate and unequal system, even though we supposedly came out of that Plessy versus Ferguson and legal pieces a long time ago, and separate and unequal, no, we are still in that mix. And obviously, in this context that we're operating in now with this current administration and the attacks that on education, well, the folks like Harvard and all of those other folks can stand in that face of it
But
because
not
they've got phenomenal resources and averaging triple digits in terms of millions in terms of um their I'm losing the term right now uh uh but they're benefactors and the monies that they have versus on average an HBCU might have 10 or 20 million dollars versus 200 or 2 billion dollar
yes,
endowments. I'm sorry.
yes.
They're endowments. And so the fact is that attack on education was really an attack on those folks at the lower end as usual.
Mm-hmm.
um, and we know that those folks are the folks that are under-resourced.
Mm-hmm.
And but we've got to begin to change the narrative.
Yes.
And part of that narrative, excuse me, is changing the economics which drive how our systems are funded.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, it's, through taxpayers and property taxes. And well, in most of the urban communities, our Black and brown folks don't own property.
Property. So there's no,
And
yes.
so so we can't speak to the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it becomes a dependency thing. And it's that way, it's intentional.
It's intentional.
It's absolutely intentional. And so we have to do what we can to work against those things.
And that brings me to something I saw on your website, and I wanted to make sure I ask you to unpack it for me. I saw
Sure.
a scorecard where
Yes.
you broke down underserved communities. Explain that for us.
Well, so we've got to look at the data, and that's what the scorecard is about. The scorecard is about telling the story and not having it be people thinking that it's just my whim that I'm coming up with this information. The fact of the matter is that the data speaks for itself, and well, not that it speaks for itself. We can't allow it to continue to speak the way that it does. And so when I came up with, so I said I've got to tie research and data together so that folks really understand the intentionality of these various systems that we're trying to change.
Mhm.
And so the scorecard is something that again ties sports in and says so everybody that plays golf knows that they got to keep score. And there are penalties for not reporting the correct score. And so if we stay with that same type of motif and say and understanding, then now we have a scorecard about our communities. And what the
Mm.
scorecard tells you is that we're spending hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars on these different sports facilities, whether they're at college level, and now we have, just this week, we've had the president have a bring a group together of 50 people to talk about how they're going to save college athletics. Well, they're not trying to save college athletics. They're trying to save the funding system, which is the labor, free labor. Well, not free, but through scholarships. They're
Mhm.
saying that, okay, you get a scholarship, that's payment. Well, it's not in proportion to the amount of revenues that are being generated through our schools.
True.
And mark my word, Lana, we are getting to the place to where we're going to have high schools generating revenue through athletics. Right now, we're beginning to, so over these last 10 years or so, we've had television channels, ESPN, high school, and they're going, and so that commercialization, and the United States is the most famous place for commercialization and
Yes.
leveraging sports to do all of these various things. Well,
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is, it's now trickling down to our schools. And that's why we have kids who feel like they don't have time because the school I mean, LeBron James and all of those kids made millions of dollars for their school, for their Catholic school while they were
Mm.
going there. Well,
Mm.
because they weren't playing in 500 seat little gyms. They
Mm.
were playing in 15,000 seat arenas. And they adjusted that so from the time he was a sophomore, their high school was making all of this revenue off of them and their team. And so that's the system that Trump is trying to save and that all these folks, and the data says that hey, 70% of the kids who are playing football and basketball are black and brown kids
Mm-hmm.
on all of these campuses.
Mm-hmm.
They're generating millions and millions of dollars, especially at the Division I level, not at most of the other levels, but at the Division I big time college athletics. We've got 3,000 colleges. Only about 25 colleges are self-sustaining. Out of all those schools, there's 105 top Division I programs. Only about 20 to 25 of them, depending on the year, are self-sustaining. Otherwise, they take money. And the reason that it's such a big deal is that most kids want to go to a school, even if they never played sports, they want to go to a school that has a great sports team,
See.
right? So it's a recruitment tool.
Mm-hmm.
Athletics in college, especially high school as well, is a recruitment tool. In most of our communities and most of the under-resourced communities, most of the kids stay in school if they're on a team
Yes.
in the grade school and up to high school. Well, in college, it's absolutely a recruitment tool so they put all this money into recruiting kids, and the majority of the kids at the school would say, I wouldn't come here if they didn't have big time athletics.
Mm.
And so we've got to record that. That's where the scorecard comes in. Is saying, here's how we're spending all of this stuff, and here's how we've shifted the focus. And then here's how school is. Schools are down here, and sports are way up here, and our schools are failing.
Mm.
We've got Baltimore, they built, so I was the interim director there for Parks and Recreation. Brother, we've got the Orioles put in a new stadium, Ravens, new stadiums. Well, and they have no more than 10% of the kids in any subject area are proficient in any subject area. You got Detroit, there's 13 schools. I think it's Baltimore. I don't have the scorecard data with me right here, but something like 13 schools that very less than 10% of the kids are proficient in any area, academic area. And so you can look at that's why I came up with this scorecard, is to say we've got all this interest. Every family, everybody is walking around with all these Patriots gear on, all the, the
Mm-hmm.
Saints gear, and everybody makes a big deal of having all of that gear, not making a big deal about kids,
Being educated.
being educated. And so we have it's been skewed for a long time. The only way we begin to level it out is to be able to document it, keep score, share that, so you may be familiar with what's called the racial report card
Mm-hmm.
that's been for the NCAA. It comes a little bit off of some of that,
Mm.
Richard Lapchick created that,
Mm-hmm.
several years ago, and it scores the percentage of African American and other folks who are in leadership positions and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the scorecard does this, similar things in terms of what, how do we document the story about where the resources are going,
Okay.
who's scoring out at which levels. For example, if I look at the data, most school districts, especially most major urban districts, are spending upwards of 10 to 15, $20 million on tutoring and support systems, and for systems that are failing. They're not getting the results. And so, the research, brain science and sports science research says if we put their interests together and bring this together, then we might see 30 or 40% increase in their academic performance. Well,
Mm-hmm.
a 30 or 40% increase means that they maybe then are back on grade level or even at levels higher. And so I'd much rather be in that place
Yes.
than in the other.
Yes.
And so I think Sports Genius is the answer.
I believe so. I believe so. And we've talked about intergenerational and listen to the story of your mom. And it's one thing that has always puzzled me about our Black community.
Hmm.
Education, especially, coming out of civil rights, coming out of enslavement, education was always seen as a tool for liberation.
Right,
But here it is in modern times, it just seems like it's an afterthought, which is so sad because it's like you've bought into the design
right.
of wanting us all walking around dumb and uneducated, and many things happen when that happens.
Well, we never took control of our own systems, even though, so worked, like I said, I worked at an HBCU. But when I went into my first faculty meeting and saw that the majority of the faculty were white, I said, there's a problem. And
Yes.
so if you look at across our HBCUs, the predominance is not people of color. If you look at the statistics about the staffing and faculty, especially faculty at HBCUs, is predominantly white.
You're not going to want to teach me to my optimal level.
Well, that's the whole reason that we had these institutions, but the reality is that they're not operating the way that we
Would
think
expect them.
or
Yes.
would expect them to be operating. And so, because, I talked to several of my friends and I'm like, we have challenges of finding work. And I'm thinking, well, why am I having a challenge? The reason I'm having a challenge is we have a system that's supposed to be for us. I mean, if we look at the predominant or the traditionally white institutions, they traditionally hire white people. If we look at HBCUs, and if the data says that the majority of the folks working at an HBCU, you would think would be people of color. Well, that's not the case. And so when I walked into that faculty meeting, I thought I was in the wrong place. I was on the campus, and so that has always been a story for me because that was the reality. And so we actually happened to have a black provost at the time. And so after that first meeting, I talked to him and I was like, what's going on? there wasn't any real response that I could report to you right now that, and I definitely couldn't report it back then. And so that has something that's has stayed with me. And so when you think about it and you think that's the system that's supposed to be our space, and it's been compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And so so we've got to make some adjustments. And so I think, so one of the things that I'm doing now is reaching out to the HBCU Library Alliance to be able to talk with their directors to be able to say, hey, look, let's bring Sports Genius to your campuses. Then we can create a whole core of young people who can begin to drive the changes and older folks who can begin to genius mentors that are already in our communities.
Awesome.
How do we tap into those folks to then be able to make the changes in our communities that we really want to see
Awesome.
and not be reliant on other folks
That's
to
the
be able
key.
to do it. And for example, we could host more, for example, there's sports tournaments that get happen all year round. And so during break time, during summer times, after school programs, some of those things can be driven through our campuses, which means that then the system can begin to generate its own revenue and not be dependent on the Department of Education giving it,
Mm-hmm.
supporting in the way that they should. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then we can still fight for and advocate for those dollars that we want to come into our community that should be coming in through the taxpayer pieces,
Mm-hmm.
but not be dependent solely on those things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, so I'm looking to build that force of folks trained in Sports Genius that can then go out and be on the campuses, work with the librarians to bring the seniors from our senior living communities into our schools, bring the kids so they can connect with the seniors so that that wisdom doesn't get lost. The Wisdom Keepers is the name, but the whole idea is that it brings us back to griots and
Yes.
to our African history of where the storytellers, the historians, the importance of those folks in our communities, sharing that wisdom. That's wisdom keepers, and that is, the old coach, the old teacher, connecting with the young person who didn't know what the struggle was that this teacher had, but they need to know that so that as they go forward, they one can recognize that, hey, they don't have to deal with that anymore
Mm-hmm.
because those traps were already set off
Mm-hmm.
and they came through those storms. So don't go through the same storm that they went through. You
Thank
don't have to.
you.
They went
Thank
through it
you.
already.
Thank
And
you.
so but because that means a waste of a resource. And that's what's been happening in our communities is we've had
Yeah.
the disconnect between our seniors and our young people
Yeah.
and the folks in between. And
Mm-hmm.
so how we bridge those gaps is to be able to change the narrative and be able to have systems that actually are purposeful, intentional, and resourceful.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that is something that collectively as a community we have not learned to regain is how to be, self-sufficient. I think we lost a
Right.
lot of that. There's cost and benefits with desegregation,
Absolutely.
and one of them I think is the self-sufficiency. We lost that a lot because we had our
Well, that
own.
was intentional because we wanted those folks, and we tell people we want you to be dependent on the system. We don't want you to be independent. We don't. That's why we didn't want you to learn. That's why we didn't want you to read. Those things were intentional, and so it's it's been renamed and shuffled around, but it's the same system. And
Mm-hmm.
and so for that sake, for the same 400 years, we've been in this whole cycle, and we've talked about wanting to get out of it and how we break it, but we haven't put systems in place to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have, then they've been reactive instead of proactive.
Yes.
And so that to me, that's the nature of Sports Genius is that it's a proactive system of living that says, here's a commonality that the world has,
Mm-hmm.
sports. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things that I'm also doing is working. Like I said, I got my Brazilian friend here, sitting here observing, and she's actually right now reading a dual language training program that I created to be able to then be able to, for her to go back to Brazil to then
Mm-hmm.
be able to take Sports Genius and be
Awesome.
able to work in their system. And the whole thing with the as I've, been building out this system is, for the Damascus Road Playbook for Sports Genius, is translating these things into the language and culture of the people who are going to be managing it and dealing with it
Mm-hmm.
and engaging with it so that they're not learning that piece in terms of typically from the West, we forced our way. And so it's, you don't know English, then you can't learn it. No,
Yes.
I've
Yes.
got to learn multiple languages. I love the fact that I saw a story the other day with Dwayne Wade talking about Kobe Bryant and when they were at the Olympics and walking in the Village. Dwayne Wade said, "Hey, I thought that I was big time. Well, I was walking with Kobe, and Kobe could speak to all of these people in their language." So he said, "Yeah, I know." He spoke about 9 different languages. And
Mm-hmm.
what does that do? That makes it that those folks feel like they're on a level field instead of where the model that we talk about is a deficiency model where we're always projecting something down on folks
Mm-hmm.
instead of talking about a level playing field. Well, I don't want folks to have to, I want to make sure that things are translated in their language so that they don't have to learn English to be able to get all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, that when we translate it, that we put it in such a way that it's not feeling like the pressure is coming down, but it is something that is helping to lift up,
Awesome.
And so the important nomenclature, the important processes, the important systems are all about how we uplift and sustain in a positive way, not project.
Mm, awesome. I love it. I love it. I got one more question before I ask you my random question.
Sure.
Um, hypothetical question.
Okay.
Hypothetical question. Because you were a walk-on athlete
Yes.
in college. Did you have a plan B when you walked on, or was that was going to be it?
Well, I was already in the Marine Corps, and
Okay.
so one of the things because my mother didn't like the fact that I asked her to sign up for me to join the Marine Corps because she thought that I would be the only person in our family to graduate from college when I got accepted and
Mhm.
everything. And I was recruited. I just, had to walk on at Pitt because I had already decided that the economic system at home was not good and
Mhm.
that I could join the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps had what was called direct deposit and direct withdrawals. And so I learned about that and I learned that I could send money home. And
Mhm.
I think the recruiter really used that with me. But once I learned about that, I was able to sign up and join, and my mother let me. But she only let me once I got accepted to Pitt because there was a Marine Corps base walking distance from the campus. And
Mhm.
so my mother and my congressman got my enlistment changed so that I could go to Pitt.
Okay.
So that's why it was me as a walk-on instead of getting a scholarship or
Scholarship
getting some
somewhere.
support.
Okay.
And it's because I had decided as a young man thinking, hey, my family is not positioned the way that I want. I can have some
Contribute.
impact on that. And so that's what I did.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you my hypothetical question
Sure,
on
I'm
that.
ready.
So, let's say you're standing in front of a high school student athlete,
Sure.
and they say, Dr. T, I don't need to learn these athletics. I'm good at this football, basketball. I'm going to get a scholarship and
Yeah.
I'm going to go to the NBA. I'm not trying to hear what you got to say about those athletics. What's
Yes.
the conversation like?
No, so they're not trying to hear what I'm saying about academics.
Academics. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. They're going
They're
on.
going to the athletics.
Yes.
Yeah. So the reality is that less than 1% of the folks who play football make it to professional football. Less than 2% of the folks who play in the world that want to play professional basketball play it.
Mm,
And so, th those numbers are changing because of television. We're creating more leagues around the world,
mm-hmm.
but the reality is that it's a very small percentage. And then also the reality is that because of the pressure of playing those things, and because it becomes year round, your body has less time to recover. So there's a greater likelihood that you're going to get injured. And
Mm,
so typically, so that in the professional leagues, they have two different dynamics working. They'll say, "Are you hurt or are you injured?" And
mm,
so they make that distinction because it's a psychological piece, but don't get it twisted.
mm,
It's actually an economic piece because the reality is if I keep thinking that I'm injured and I'm repeatedly injured or versus being hurt, then I can recover from being hurt and I can even play hurt.
mm-hmm.
But if I'm injured, then the likelihood is that it's something that's going to be sustaining and
Mm-hmm.
repeated. And
Mm-hmm.
if, for example, if I throw out my shoulder, well, once I throw out my shoulder and I've damaged it, even if I have surgery, it's not 100% and it's never back to where it was. Even, thankfully, we have knee surgeries. I mean, because people who used to tear their ACL, for example, that ended Gail Sayers' career in the 1960s. Now it's 4 weeks, and I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
Or depending on the severity, it could be 9 months,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece that we have to keep in mind is that if we are fortunate enough, if you young man are fortunate enough or young woman are fortunate enough to be able to play, then the reality is you're not going to make anywhere near the money you think that you're going to make because you've got to pay all of these different people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's stars who are in the entertainment world and sports world and everything. Shaquille was, O'Neal would tell you, he went to the bank when he got his first contract, bought two major vehicles for his mama and his papa, and went back to the bank, and his card was declined when he went to Walmart because he had spent more money. He didn't realize that the agent took money, that all of these different folks were taking money. So it's never what you think it is. On average, the average for a professional lifespan is 3 years.
Mm,
Not 10 or 15 or 20 like
mm,
LeBron and all those folks. They totally skew the statistics. The
mm-hmm.
reality is that it's more likely that you're going to be 3 years. Now, the good thing about the current situation is that see, even as you come in, if you make it and you're one of that 1%, 2%, whatever it is, then you're averaging $1 million. You become a millionaire right away because of television and professional sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, if you're fortunate enough to do that, but most people aren't. And so in the NCAA, for example, they have commercials over, 20 some years, 15, 20 years that always talked about, most athletes have a career in things other than sports.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the commercials. And so you look at that and say, okay, well, but that's not the way that it's sold to our young people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, us genius mentors have to do better in telling that story and making
Okay.
sure that young people understand that the reality is that most of them will not play professional sports. Enjoy the whole background and life experience that you have while you're playing sports. The fact of the matter is that within our communities, we've developed programs and services to keep people active and all of those things, but you're more likely to have a career in sports and entertainment in terms of the business side
Yes.
than the performance side.
Yes.
And so I'm here to be able to be that professor that says, hey, you were a great athlete in high school and even into college, and maybe you had some, smelled some, had a cup of coffee at, in professional leagues and things, and you chased the dream just like I did. But the reality is I've had people that I competed against that are no longer on this earth. People that took steroids, for example. I came through the
Mm,
steroid years, and a number of young people who were great athletes who, went the steroid way, and those folks died from
mm,
complications from that steroids, the devastations of their body. And so, there's all of these pressures, and everybody thinks that they're going to be the multimillionaire and all of those things. Um, and I'm not going to be here to, shortchange anybody in their dreams. That's not my place. My place is to tell you about the numbers, to tell you about, the reality of it, and then for you to make whatever decision you need to make. And unfortunately, we have, these commercials everybody's talking about, like you just asked a question about, do you have a plan B? Most of those folks and see, people don't get this, but Joe Bryant, who was Kobe Bryant's father, played for the Philadelphia 76ers when
yes,
I was
yes,
coming up.
yes.
He moved his family to Italy to play professional football because he couldn't make him anymore in the NBA. And so he raised his son, Kobe, to have versatility, a
Okay.
versatility that most, excuse me, young black boys don't have because
Mm.
the United States, unlike in most other cultures around the world, multilingual is nothing, is
It's
kind of
commonplace.
traditional.
Yes,
It's
yes.
common, not in the United States. And so when he did that, he took them out of this context so that he could be that. Now, he didn't know that his son was going to be a great basketball player, but he was preparing his son for life by teaching him multiple languages and putting him in a
Mm,
culture where multiple languages were spoken. And so the fact that Kobe could speak after his career to talk about, I didn't have a plan B. Well, he did because he was talented enough to be recruited by institutions like Duke and all of these other places. He could have chosen to
mm-hmm.
go to college. He was fortunate enough that they changed the rules, so he was able to go into the NBA.
Yeah.
And so, but that's again, the
One. That's
system
the
that
one.
was right. That was an exception, and not, and just because you see something on television doesn't make you exceptional. And that's the problem with television is they
Yes.
keep trying to convince people that this is common. No, LeBron, there's only one. There's only one Kobe. There's only one LeBron. There's only one Michael Jordan. There's not going to be another one. So television. So what I would say to that young man or young woman, leagues are there's opportunities to pursue your dream. Don't think of it as plan A and plan B because there's only one life, yours.
Mm.
There's only one life. That's yours. And so if you go down a path and you think, okay, I want to be totally committed to that path, and then you break your leg,
Mm.
what are you going to do? So don't tell me that well, I didn't have a plan B. Well, then you were not thinking about you. You were trying to project yourself into somebody else who had already finished their career and came through. But guess what? They didn't come through injury free. They didn't come through without challenge and all of those things. And so make sure that if you're going to, think you're going to walk in somebody else's shoes, then you got to walk in those shoes when they were coming through the storms and
Yes.
not just when everything is sunny and
All
rosy.
shiny and bells and whistles,
Yes, because
right?
everything that shines is not gold.
Yes, indeed.
So that would be my answer to them.
It's amazing, and
It would be kind of how could I knock them upside the head?
It's just amazing. And I know some of it is young mind thinking, but I think the last I checked, there's over 48 million Black people in the United States. So
Yeah,
when you look at just the amount of people who are playing in the NBA just
right,
alone, like
right.
you just
Less
started,
than 1% of the people.
you
And
have
that's actually less than 1% of the people who've ever played, not just 1% that are this year. It's
mhm,
1% of the folks who've ever played the game. And so that's the story that's not being told. And so
consistently.
I also mentioned that the president had this committee and they're trying to save college athletics. Well, and now our women, like in the WNBA and the women's soccer team, the women's national soccer team, have, they had to fight for, go to court for wage discrimination.
Hmm.
And so that's the context that our young people are coming up in.
Hmm.
Even now, the women who are the top basketball players in the world are fighting because they're not being paid. They're being paid based, quote unquote, slave wages.
Hmm.
And that's the basis of the funding structure in the United States sports system is free labor.
Yes.
And that's what it's always been. And that's why we tied sports to education so that there would be free labor.
Mm.
And that's why they didn't change the college system when they started making all of this revenue. The only folks who didn't get paid were the athletes.
Athletes. Mm.
In the 70s and 80s, the athletic directors were not making over $100,000 a year. Now the highest paid athletic director is something like $5 million a year. The highest paid
Ooh.
football coach is right now 13 point something $1 million a year. And they're upset that athletes want their name, image, and likeness to be paid for because that's where they were making the money. And
Mm.
that's what they've been making the money. And so now go to college, kid, because the NIL system and the revenue sharing system is going to work in your favor. But even there, 20 the coaches, the administrators, the agents are taking 20% of your salary, whereas at the professional level, it's locked in. They can only take no more than 5%.
Okay.
So
Okay.
why are our college kids being abused?
Yes.
So, people need to understand the financial structure before they start stepping off and chasing these dreams. Chase your dream. Please do chase your dream. And if I can help you reach your dream, then I'm going to do that. But part of the way along the way, I'm going to, I've
Knock some sense into you, right?
got a little bit of sense that my mama would have smacked me in the back of my head, like, boy, get right.
And and I'm going to ask that is another component that you add to all the various plethora of components that you already have. Is I really think that it's important, because our young people do focus on sports, early on, is to
Yes,
get some financial education involved, because if
absolutely.
you get the money, and it goes poof, what was all that work for in the first
That's
place?
right. You gotta so financial liter so part of Sports Genius is to be able to say, okay, on the app, financial literacy has to be a piece of it.
Yes.
We used to have the banks come into the school. I've got I've got, it's so funny because my friend that's sitting here from Brazil, I had uh, money from Brazil that I had from when I was in school. I had it sitting in my apartment, and she came to visit, and they saw the money sitting, and I was like, I've had that for like 30 some years, just because it was when I was a kid. We
Mm-hmm.
had, I had pounds and
Mm-hmm.
different. I can't even call the different names of the different monies that
Denominations,
I've had.
yes.
But we need to teach our kids about, so that needs to be that, that's one of those pieces that steps outside of the traditional pieces that says that financial literacy has to be a major piece of our learning system. It's not right now
Mm-hmm.
because why? Because as long as you stay ignorant to those things, then I can control you and
Mm-hmm.
control those things. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what this whole education piece is about. We have the genius in us, and I'm looking to pull it out of folks, and I'm looking to build systems that where we can share it, and where we take ownership of our communities.
Awesome.
We take
Awesome.
ownership of the growth and development that is who we are as individuals and as a community, as a family, as a community, as a society, and then as a nation and as a world.
Mhm.
And all of those pieces are have for too long been reactive. It's time for us to be more proactive
Mhm. Have a vision, write the plane, and write. Have a vision, write it down, make it plain.
and make it happen.
Hmm.
And get on that train that says, get a ticket or get left at the station. But
Yes,
the
indeed.
but the train is moving.
It's going to move, and I think that's one thing that we fail to realize. That point is going to move. So, all right. Let me ask you my random question, and then I'm gonna ask you to give us the website so that we can connect with you.
All
Let's
right.
see what I've got here. Let's see. How often do you look at your phone every day?
Oh, well, I have told myself that I'm going to read to the end of the internet. So I look at my phone, my phone is burned, it burns in my hand. It doesn't burn in my hands for social pieces. It
Okay.
burns in my hands for learning pieces.
Knowledge.
Yes, and so I will, I pick it up and I'm reading. I have different alerts for
Okay.
knowledge pieces to stay connected with what's going on
Awesome.
and knowing what world news is, not just U.S. news or not just Boston news
Mm-hmm.
or New England news. I've got to know what's happening in the world.
Well,
I'm loving what's going on with Ibrahim Traore and
mm,
the Sahel states and
awesome.
countries, and
Awesome.
I'm hoping that I eventually can take Sports Genius to Africa and to every corner of the world. So I look at my phone. It isn't for social pieces. It really is about knowledge, and I can't ever read enough. So
Awesome. I love. That's what the phone should be used for. Well,
yeah.
Dr. T, tell us how we get in touch with you.
So right now you can, ACES is the, academic, like you said, academic coaching, enrichment, and sports network, and through ACES, then ACE www.aces dash, I'm sorry, hyphen, not dash, network.com/ sports genius. I'm going to, in the next couple of weeks, have Sports Genius have its own
Okay.
website. But it's part of that whole funding process of starting a new business piece and developing all of those things. So we're coming in at a really beginning stage, earliest infancy piece. And then also by telephone, 617-610-5785. Um, and you can find me all over the internet, over, for some of the educational pieces and things that I've done. But those two primarily are the places. And then once Sports Genius is its own entity, then it will have its own. And I'll be back and let you know. And hopefully you'll invite me back
As always.
for another conversation.
Always. So, one last question as you were talking, I thought
Sure.
if there is a school administrator out listening and says, hey, Dr. T, can you come and consult and see how you can whip our school into shape? Do you do any consulting work?
There's no can I do it. It's absolutely let's get it done.
Okay.
And so that's a big piece of what I'm setting up right now is really the folks who've been in my network. So another one of the places is through something like LinkedIn. We have what I call the Society for Sports-Based Youth Development.
Okay.
And so through the society, through LinkedIn, Facebook, and all of those pieces, I then post articles and things about ways to get connected. But absolutely, the consulting piece is one of those pieces. I'm looking forward to folks in school districts. If you want to really change the narrative in our
Awesome.
communities,
Awesome.
then, let me come in and we'll train up your people. It's not about us coming and staying. It's
Mm-hmm.
about us coming and because, we get caught up in bringing in interveners and then we want to place the blame on those folks.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to come in, share with you these systems and resources, train up your people so that then they can sustain the system and it can grow from internally grow instead of, with external forces.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. T, I know you making mom and daddy so proud, so very proud. And I
Thank
have
you. I appreciate it.
awesome. And I have enjoyed our time together today, the knowledge that you shared, the framework, I can't remember the name of the book, but I had read about systems, complex systems about 5 years ago. And that's
Sure.
kind of when a whole bunch of, light bulbs and like, oh, that's how everything's been working. But, I don't
Yes.
think people realize, we're existing in these things that we're not even
Right.
really aware are having pull, push, on our day-to-day lives. So
Yes.
to have somebody, saying, hey, Dr. T's trying to tell you, there's these forces working at you. It's just, I mean, it's just how we move forward collectively. So I
It
just
is.
appreciate you even, putting the energy and effort into our intergenerational work. So thank you so much for little old
Well,
me.
Lance, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for this opportunity to be able to share. The last thing that I'll share is, I believe that God gives me these things to be able to share them, not to hold on to them. He didn't give it for me to be this bright shining star. If it's to make all of these other stars and to recognize all the genius that is in our communities and the people who are those geniuses. And so hopefully we're able to do that through vehicles just like your show.
And you will. And you will. Because we are some awesome, excellent people. So
We absolutely are. Absolutely.
that is all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Black Men Matter series on the Male Perspective. This podcast is an initiative of Conversations in Color, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to uplifting Black voices. Make sure to check out our website, conversationsincolor.org, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you on the next episode.